I have two goals over the next couple of days. The first is we're going to bike to the end of the Denali Park Road. We're starting in around mile 30 and we're going to get out to Wonder Lake hopefully at mile 85. So that's just over 100 miles of biking. Though it'll be a little tricky because there is a landslide on the road that we'll have to get around. But the second goal is I really want to plot my fantasy book. So for this book, there are 3 main characters and they'll each get their own separate plot lines and they're doing different things in the world. So I imagine I'm going to try and plot all 3 separately using a 3-act story arc. So that's the goal, that's the intention. I'm going to start with the one who's a bit more of like the main character of the 3. And the first thing I have to do before I set that 3-act story structures, I have to figure out my main character's misbelief, their internal conflict, because that really shapes the turning points at each of the major plot progression. So that's something I was thinking a little bit about last night, and hopefully today I can develop that a lot more. Fortunately or unfortunately, we ran into some bears. They're like right about here. And in Denali National Park, you have to be over 300 yards away from a bear because that's their like bubble of space they like. And because they're within like 150 yards of the road, we just have to wait till they eventually wander out of view. And so far we've waited for probably like half an hour and they're slowly moving away, but not at a fast pace. But I figured we could take a second and talk a little bit about the plotting that I'm planning to do for my book. The stories I like to write, I like to make it very like character driven because it's easy to come up with fun external plot events, but none of that matters unless it impacts the character themselves. Theoretically, a reader only really cares about stuff that happens to their character. You can keep a reader excited for a little while of just like having fun things happen, but that's not necessarily like gonna carry them through like, you know, a 60, 70, 80,000 word story arc, or even like, you know, a fantasy book if it's like 200,000 words. It's really important for me when I'm writing to really nail down that misbelief, because that internal conflict, that misbelief, is being challenged by the inciting incident. It's being altered by the midpoint, and it's the revelation that happens at the climax. So really understanding and nailing that down so that way I can have very clean, obvious, simple changes happening at those key points. Still trying to figure out exactly what I want those inflection points. I'm kind of a little bit all over the place. So I'm building this internal conflict that I have like this like general idea for this like first main character, what I want it to be, but I kind of want to nail it down a little bit more specifically. I've been writing a lot of standalone stories where, you know, there's one conclusive story arc, but if I'm planning to make this a series, you know, there's going to be smaller arcs throughout each book. So trying to understand how much should the character learn, and should there be some sort of regression even, because it'll be built upon in like subsequent books basically. So I'm trying to come up with exactly what I want this internal conflict to be, because if you come up with like 2 or 3, it just makes everything more confusing, makes everything less simple and streamlined. So it's like, even though it seems basic and I know people are complicated and complex, people in books are less complex than people in real life, in the sense that there's just going to be one major theme, I think, that I need to come up with. The landslide happened in 2021, less than a year after I got up to Alaska. And so the only way around is to go down into this riverbed and around. I think it should be open next year. So it's been closed for like 4 years, but that'll probably take us like a couple of hours to get back onto the road. So a little bit of a deviation, but not too bad, I don't think. It'll only be a couple river crossings. I wasn't able to think about my story as much as I would have wanted to. I think I have this romantic vision in my head that as I'm biking or hiking or on these outdoor adventures, I can just think deeply about exactly what I want in these stories, about the outlining, and spend all this time reflecting. But I didn't account for the effort it takes to actually bike, like on the uphills. I feel like I had to clear my mind of everything else just because it just takes so much focus to just make myself keep pedaling. So while there were some moments where I was able to think about it, definitely not as much as I would have wanted. As you can probably hear, it is raining. It has been intermittently raining off and on all day, and luckily, like, a lot of our stuff stayed dry. But yeah, it was a little miserable setting up the tent and coming inside, but now I'm all cozy in my sleeping bag and my warm clothes. But I'm starting to fade a little bit, but before I do that, before I go to sleep, I want to try and get the broad strokes down for the primary main character's character arc. I'm not going to do anything too detailed, I think, today, but just try and get, you know, the general idea of what's happening, mostly at the inciting incident midpoint and like climax resolution. Really trying to understand kind of those major progressions, I think, is going to be really important. That I can fill in the blanks later.
Nope, there it goes, you decided. Yeah.
Hello, Mr. Caribou. Oh gosh. Welcome to another edition of catching you up in the tent while it is pouring rain outside. I really wish it wasn't. It has been raining all day. It has been raining so much. It's like raining so much that like nothing can stay dry unless it's like in plastic, but like all my rain gear is soaked through. My glasses were just like covered in water droplets. Anyways, that's besides the point. We are now warm, we are now dry, and that's what matters. And we have quite a lot of time this evening to keep working on writing because we ended up finishing pretty early today. I don't know if we're gonna make it to Wonder Lake. We are probably like 10 miles away from it, and the plan was to set up a camp here and then go the last 10, come back without like all of our camping gear. But it just doesn't seem worth it because we're literally in like cloud fog. That one moment at Allison Visitor Center, we were there for like probably like 45 minutes, maybe even an hour. And there was like one moment where you could see the valley, but then it just became socked in again. So it just doesn't feel worth it to do an extra 20 miles to not see anything. But yesterday and today apparently are supposed to be the worst of the days, so I'm hopeful we'll be able to see Denali tomorrow. But with that being said, I have a lot of time to work on the second character's outline. I feel pretty good about the first one. I keep going back and forth of like, but is it perfect? Did I do this right? Because I think when I've been writing thrillers in the past of like one character, one book, it's so much easier to be like, this is their one internal struggle, this is the lesson of the story, blah, 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 blah. But with this, like, there's so much more going on. And even though, like, I really want it to be as character-driven as possible, but I think because, you know, this is the first book of potentially many books, and I want this character to go through a bunch of different things, that it's okay for it to be this micro arc where from what I've designed, the way the story ends, like if she'd been placed in that position at the beginning of the book, she wouldn't have made the choices she did. And I think that at the end of the day is the important bit, whether or not there's a very clear like progression to it. And it's actually really interesting because so a lot of this 3-act story structure that I'm using is from Abby Emmons on YouTube, and I think she gets it from a book called Storygraph. But essentially, there's the option with the kind of aha moment when the character has the realization of like what they're doing wrong, and they have like this whole dark moment of the soul thing. There's an option to swap it for a temptation moment. So basically my character would have been tempted by this choice at the beginning of the story, but by the end of the story they've decided against it.
So that, I think, is the major progression, and really making clear those two changes, like how it morphs will be the key there. But I think for this second character, it's going to be a lot easier of trying to figure out what their character arc should be, because, so I know I'm thinking really far down the road here, but I'm kind of imagine that in every book I write, some of the POV characters will change. Like, I don't know if I'll ever want more than like 4 or 5 POV characters. I don't know. I've never written a fantasy book. That may change. But this main character that I did the first arc for, she's going to be a main character across all of the books. But I'm thinking for this second one that I'm working on, they're not going to be a main character in the second book, but they're going to be a strong side character to the other main character. So it's going to be like, it's going to swap to someone else like in their storyline, if that makes sense. So it feels a lot easier to do kind of a one-off in this person's head, how they're progressing, and where the first kind of this main character throughout the whole series, while this person is going to have to go through a whole bunch of stuff, and they're basically of how I want to set this whole thing up, you know, like they're a bit more of this chosen one. They feel more locked in. But this other POV character, there's a lot more room for what I can do with them. Like their actions are important in the first book, but potentially in subsequent books, I don't have a strong idea yet. So there's just a lot more to work with there. And then also, when I finally get to the third guy, he is kind of in a similar boat, but I think I have I kind of designed him already with a pretty strong conflict that he's going towards. But we're going to go with the second person first. We're going to go back through all the different points. But I kind of want the second character to be a foil for the main character. So they interact at the beginning of the book and then go separate ways, but they have similar kind of histories. They come from similar places. But so I kind of want to demonstrate how different people can go from a similar place in different directions and diverge, and how those decisions really shape where you go from there in life. So that's what I'll be working on.
We have woken up to sunshine. It feels so good. It was raining a little bit this morning, but then it stopped around, I think, like 7:30 or 8. And then we looked outside and look at this mountain range. I think this over here is Denali, but you can't quite see the top because of the clouds. But it's just been lifting all morning, so I'm hoping that throughout the day we'll see more and more of it. We're going to go out to Wonder Lake today, actually, and we're going to leave our camp here so we have less to carry. And honestly, I'm hoping that the tents dry out. That would be amazing. Like, I feel like all this is worth it. Is worth all the rain and suffering of yesterday. Though yesterday wasn't all bad, I did finish the outlining for the second character, which felt really good. I mean, I'm feeling pretty solid about it. I feel like I need to think about it a little bit more, but I'm on to the third character today. And I've actually been, oh, by the way, you're literally being charged as I'm filming you because my phone was down to 6% this morning. But I've been debating the third character's personality, because a lot of the characters that I tend to write, main characters, tend to be like talkative, outgoing people. And I'm thinking about making him a bit more quiet. Not that he's shy, not even that he's that like deep thinking, but just like more of the silent type. And I'm playing around with that, but that doesn't really affect as much maybe like the character arc. But so that's what I'll be thinking on and working on today, while hopefully we see some more beautiful Denali. I cannot overstate how important it was that it was sunny that morning, because my clothes were soaked. It was so hard for me to just convince myself to put on a wet pair of pants, a wet shirt, and like they weren't cotton, so I knew that they would keep me warm even though they were wet. But being able to have the sun, being able to have some wind, like the clothes actually managed to dry, and it can completely change your outlook by being able to be comfortable again and in dry clothing. I was also in a really good mood because I had finished the second character arc outline the previous evening when I was trapped in my tent with all of that rain.
And so I was 2/3 of the way done towards my goal. I felt confident about diving into the third one. Everything was going really smoothly. But to be honest, I'm not doing a really in-depth outline at this point. My goal is really to get 1 or 2 sentences down for each of the major plot events that happen throughout the story, not really going down to scene level or, smaller scale detail on how all these things are going to work. So there's still a lot more I've got to figure out, but it's just those broad strokes to really get an idea of where this character is going and how they're going to end up in this book.
We have accomplished our first goal of the trip. We made to mile 85 at Wonder Lake. The lake was nice, but definitely this view has been beyond anything I could have wanted. Like, sure, Denali's a little bit clouded at the top, but we basically were biking this way parallel with the mountain range, and so I kept looking over because it was just so beautiful. There was a few times where I felt myself starting to, aim off the road, so I had to quickly readjust. But this has just been so beautiful. So the goal is completed, but the hard part is yet to come because it's a lot of downhill out here. So this afternoon will be pretty brutal trying to get back as far as we can on the road before we go to bed, because tonight will be our last night. We're going to try and get out tomorrow, hopefully by like midday. But as for our second goal, that is still underway. I've been thinking throughout the biking what I want for this third character arc, for this final dude. It doesn't seem like it's that complicated. I think I just need time to write it out on my tablet. But something else that was kind of popping up in my brain while I was biking was trying to make sure that all 3 character arcs are equally interesting, because I feel like there's been times with fantasy books with multiple points of view where I'm really interested in one storyline, but then as soon as it switches to a different character, I just feel like, oh, I can't wait to get through this, kind of skipping through it. But I really want to make sure that all 3 of these storylines are really interesting. So when you get to the next character, it's like, oh shoot, what are they doing again? Oh, I can't wait to find that out. I want them equally interesting. And so I'm debating this again further down the line of whether or not I should be writing it all together. Writing it like I would expect it in the final book where we're alternating the characters, or whether I should write one of these arcs to completion before going on to the next one and interweaving it after, because I feel like also trying to keep track of 3 different character arcs all at the same time while writing the story might be a lot. And so being able to just focus and put my best ideas into one storyline at a time may actually be a better option. Lots to consider, especially as we do a lot more uphill on the way back. Yeah. We have officially made it to Eielson Visitor Center. Yay! Denali's right there. We came from all the way down there. Feel like we got here a lot faster than I expected. It was still a very hard grind, honestly. Kind of exhausting, but this is the first of our 3-ish. There's maybe a 4th that's not as big, but 3 major climbs today, and it feels great. The sun is shining. Mount Eielson's looking beautiful. Denali's looking great. The wind is strong, but here we are. Also, apparently there might be a bear in the next valley. We passed some rangers in a truck, so I'll have to keep an eye out. So far, apparently it's up the hill, so hopefully it doesn't come too far down, or we might have to do another pause to let it go by. No sign of any bears, but welcome to Stony Hill, the second of our big climbs. And that one wasn't as long, but there was definitely some tough switchbacks. You can see Denali right back there. So it'll disappear for a little bit as we continue, but we're making progress. We're just doing our very big descent, and we were stopped because there's a bear right there. The road, yes, is right next to him. So I guess we're taking a break right now. There's some other bikers that are just down there waiting it out. We are now at the Toklat River. So right over there, that bridge, that's where our last big uphill is. But unfortunately, we're not going to do it tonight because that bear was a 2-hour detour. So Yeah, I have never felt more like prey in my entire life, and we will talk more about it after we make dinner, after we figure out where we're gonna camp, because we're not gonna make it to our backcountry unit at this point, which is fine, because then tomorrow we're just like leaving anyways. But yeah, update, we made it, finally, yay, we're alive. Welcome to our last installment of chats in the tent. It is actually early in the morning. I was so tired last night. We got here, we set up our tents, and I was just exhausted, so we went right to sleep. And now we're up early because we're going to make it past the landslide today and hopefully catch a bus there, and they run at specific times. So we're up early to make sure that we can get an early-ish one and get home at a good time. But I do owe you guys a little bit of a story. So you saw that clip of where we were, right, looking across at the bear, because in this place we're doing that long downhill, and that was going to take us down to the Toklat River. And basically the road there is like this sinusoidal road where you can't really see around these corners as it curves. I had stopped briefly because a rock had like pinged my bike, and I was just checking to make sure everything was okay. But in our group, we have 3 people. There's me, my boyfriend, and my boyfriend's best friend, Seth. Seth was at the front, and he was going really, really fast. He actually didn't notice the bear until he was like going right past it, so he made it through. The bear didn't really like seem to be too bothered by him, so he joined these 3 other bikers that were on the other side as he waited for us to get through. But because my boyfriend was waiting for me at that one curve, because it was on the outside curve going around a blind corner, that we had stopped, and we were looking at the inside curve where the bear was. So that's where we were, and now we had to try and figure out how to get across. And we could see the other group, they had dropped their bikes just off the road, and they were starting to hike down into the valley because the bear was just on the upper side of the road. And we were like, oh, we could potentially take our bikes down and around. Like, it's going to be killer to bring it up some of like these like hills, valley, especially with like the tundra brush. But this bear, at that point, I think we were sitting there for like half an hour and nothing had happened. So we're like, we really do need to get going. So I think the bear was probably like digging for ground squirrels or something, because it really liked its one spot. So they were kind of wandering around to the back, which we found out later, they could not actually see the bear from where they were on the roads. They wanted better vantage. And we had started to go down this steep hill with our bikes pressing on the brakes to try and get around. But we probably only made it like 5 meters down this hill when the bear started charging down the down across the road and down into this valley where we were all going, and we're like, ah. So we turned around, like brought our bikes back up, and the bear kind of stopped. Like, I think it only ran, 50 yards or something. And we're still like probably at a 300, 250 yard, distance. Probably a teeny bit closer than I would have wanted for that 300 yard buffer, but we also wanted to keep an eye on the bear. But at this point, we had now gone back up to that corner, and the bear eventually found its way back up. 5-10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, whatever, it started to wander up the road kind of towards us, and we're like, ah, shit. So we take our bikes around the corner, so now we can't see the bear, and around the next bend as it starts to like flatten out into the next like valley-ish, we left the bikes on the side of the road, and we hike up the little hill that divides, that little corner that we just went around, and we pop over the top, and we're looking down, and we're like, where is this bear? We can't see it anywhere. And then it appears just below us on the road we were literally just on. It came like out of the bushes, and it actually started to climb up the hill we were on. So this bear was probably like less than 50 yards from where we were standing on the top of this hill. So we like back up really slowly, speaking in a low, calm voice, and go back over the hill. Like, that was so scary. I was ready for this bear the whole time to charge us. But as soon as we go back over, we're not seeing it anymore, but we back up the road, kind of going around that bend further and further back, leaving our bikes, because we were at this point, me and my boyfriend were holding our bear sprays, and we just wanted to put as much distance as we could. So we went 300 yards up, and we just sat on a hill, but now we can't see over this hill anymore, right? We're in the next little valley, and we're just watching and seeing if anything's coming up. We're not really seeing anything. So we don't know if the bear is there anymore. So we don't want to go back around that corner on the road. We don't want to go up over that hill. We don't know if the bear will just appear. So we decided to go really high up at like a vantage point down. And so we hiked so high up, my quads were killing me. And we finally get to this high vantage point. We can actually see the other group of bikers like down where they were before, but we cannot see this bear. And we can basically see everything except for, like, we're up at the top of almost like this little like ridge, and the ridge kind of goes like this a little bit. So there's like this little spot kind of nestled. We can see like the curve of the road we were on. We can see the bikers over here, but there's this like blank spot in the middle that we can't see. Like there's this little ledge. So I was like, oh, should we go down and peek over it? But John was like, no, because the bear's probably in that area. But I was just like, I need to know. I don't know where this bear is. It's so freaky. So we were there for a bit. The bikers down below were like trying to signal to us in some way, but we don't know a lot of like signals or anything like that. So we're like, I don't know. And then they were gesturing for us to go right. So basically away from that valley where the bear was. And we're like, are they signaling where the bear is? Are they signaling where we're supposed to go? So we went even higher up this hill to try and see what was going on. Eventually they were signaling again, so we did that. We went to the right like they said, and we made our way slowly back down to the road where we come up, grabbed our bikes, and then went back around that corner that we had kind of run around. And that's when we see the bear. And it had found this little ledge like 150 yards up from the road, just under that blind spot I wanted us to go to. I was like, oh my God, because it literally felt like he was on Pride Rock or something. Like this bear was lounging there, staring out at the distance. You know, he probably had eaten his fill of ground squirrels and was now like, ooh, I can now just chill here and whatever. But he seemed like he wasn't gonna move. We had to make a decision. So we decided to walk underneath the road of where he was watching us, because we could have gone down into the valley, but this bear, when it charged earlier, it was so fast. And I think that in the underbrush and the tundra, he could have moved so much faster than us. I mean, he was going to move faster than us on a road too, but at least we had our bikes, at least we could move quickly on the road. So we then took our bikes and walked really, really slowly, speaking a low, calm voice the whole time, with our bikes between us and the bear. And we had to make this path under where this bear was just lounging above us. And it was honestly some of the most tense moments, I feel like, well, of my life. But there's been others, but this was definitely up there, because I was just like peeking up at it as we were walking by, and every time it like turned its big head to look at us, I was like, but we just kept going. Then a bird had fluttered by at one point close to him, and he'd also like kind of stood up a little bit to readjust. And anyways, so we finally got by. We reunited with the other bikers, and we got down Toklat River, and that's that. But oh my God, that was an experience.
Needless to say, after that whole experience, I did not actually end up writing out the third character arc. I'd had a decent amount of like brainstorming that I did in my head while we were biking, so I feel really confident that by the time I get home, I put on dry socks, I'm in warm clothing, maybe I make a cup of tea, it won't take me that long to finish it up. But technically I didn't finish goal 2, but I'm gonna say that I did for my own sake, because that bear was out of my control.